Welcome everybody to Interesting AF or Interesting as Fuck, whatever your proclivities are. And today we have such an exciting episode. I'm like vibrating. It's the doc is in. And just as a reminder, given that the one that we're going to talk about has 4 episodes, it's like a mini series. We're going to do 2 doc is in back to back, just so people don't have like the cut in the middle. And we are going to be discussing This Is a Robbery, about the largest art heist in history. It's about the 1990 robbery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. It is a Netflix documentary. It was released in 2021. There's about 4 episodes, running time from 50 to 57 minutes. The director was Colin Barnacle, and today we're going to be discussing the first 2 episodes of this documentary, which is the first one is They Looked Like Cops, and the second one is Vipers in the Grass. And holy shit. If you've been if you've been listening to us long enough, I always go into documentaries going, I will not text Elaine to go, what the fuck? I didn't make it like 2 minutes, I think,
Yeah.
for the first like 2 minutes. And then I'm just cursing in text going, what is happening to me? But yeah, that was that was I mean, I've seen all 4 and we're gonna do 2, but we're gonna talk about the first 2 and holy moly. Elaine, take
It
us away
is,
because I need to like
yeah.
collect myself.
So, because I want to start with, in case anyone's listening, even if you've watched it and you haven't done, they tell you a little bit about the museum, a little bit about Isabella Stewart Gardner, but not a lot. So I want to take it back a little bit. Um,
Ooh, little history.
yeah,
Love it.
just to give a little like about the museum, about her, because I think it is one of the lesser known and most wildly underrated museum. I've said it like 4 times already on this podcast, but it is my favorite museum on the planet. It is so unbelievable to me that that is a individual personal collection of one person, especially a woman, because we're talking about the 1800s here when she started putting this all together, early 1900s. So we'll start with Isabella Stewart Gardner first. She was born in a very well-to-do family in New York. Meets a man named Jack Gardner. They get married, excuse me, when she's just before she's 20. I think he's a little bit older, but nothing nefarious. They were truly in love. She knew his sister, and his sister, her friend, is who introduced the two of them. They get married. So she comes from wealth. He also has built his own wealth, him being Jack Gardner. They go through a tragic loss of a child. Their son died before he turned 2 from pneumonia, which was, a much more common occurrence back then. But as it would be today, and just it was back then, truly devastating. So I want these doctors, on recommendation of the doctors, to pull her out of her depression. They tell her husband to bring her to Europe and Russia, and they start traveling, which we could talk about forever, how beneficial travel is, right? And this is a decent example of that. So this becomes her whole life, is traveling, collecting art, tapestries, literature, God, you name it. There's everything in this museum. What she also wanted to do with it was share it with everybody. So they moved to Boston, which is Jack Gardner's hometown. They become socialites, complete socialites. Every one of her parties is legendary. They do these fantastic dinner parties. She lets everybody come see the art collection that they've started putting together. She has original letters from George Washington. I mean, she's got everything. So she starts letting people come see this. Everybody who lives in Boston and Providence and places nearby want to come and be invited to one of her parties. Her husband has a stroke. He dies unexpectedly. So again, she's left kind of alone with lots of money. And right before her husband had passed away, they decided they wanted to open a museum to put all this stuff. Like, yes, these parties are great, but let's build our own museum. Where they lived in Boston is over by Northeastern University now. But back then there was nothing. So this is literally turn of the century. They put together these plans. They start building this museum, and they mention that a little bit. Like, they show you in the documentary, there was literally nothing. They built it right on a swamp. So this is also kind of like one of the original museums of Boston. It's probably one of an original museum in, the New England area. Um, don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure, but it was finished in 1901. There wasn't a whole lot where she was, especially in Boston. And Boston's a very, very old city, right? So I think that speaks volumes. And yes, it does very well. It's obviously been around all this time, but part of that is because her whole goal, her will, she left all her money to this. And she said, if you are ever going to make major changes, you box all this stuff up, you ship it back to wherever it came from, Paris, London, and then you auction them, and that money hopefully goes to furthering education, or the arts and all that. So she truly had this mission, she had this passion, this love. And you know I think it's incredible to see that someone with all of this wealth went and did that, and then for her to be a woman and really kind of breaking barriers and becoming this like institution. And no one really knows about her. In fact, really, I feel like, and I'm guilty of this too. The first time I ever went to that museum was because of the art heist. Like, it's such a compelling story, but she's compelling. The building of the museum is compelling. And then the collection itself is so fucking random. But like, once you realize why it's so random, like, it's just so fascinating that one person put all of this together, put the museum together, wanted to make it her life's mission to share all of this, not to just like, as whoever it is that did this, steal these works of art and hide it from the world. Like, this was not just her personal collection. Yes, she owned, quote unquote, owned it, but she wanted to share it with everybody. And I think that's so incredible. So that's a little bit more of the history there. I'll get into
And
like my personal connection to that museum in a minute, but Linda, I
and
spoke
I
for a
will
long time, but I
say,
want to give some
no,
more
no, no,
history.
no. No, that was great because I learned some about her as well. But the I love art. Like, I love art. Like, I'm a
Me
pretentious
too.
piece of I'm a pretentious piece of shit.
What
And the
does
fact,
not make you pretentious?
no, 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 like, okay, next time talk to me about Tintorento and you'll see. You'll be like, oh, this is what she meant. The fact that I did not know about this
A
is
lot of people
insane.
don't. A lot of people
What?
don't.
I mean, how have I've been to Boston multiple times. I'm going in a couple weeks, and I will go
Go.
and I will update everybody. They don't sell tickets as far in advance because you know me,
Right.
I'm a planner. They're like, come back for tickets. I'm like, no, no, I need to plan.
Give me
Um,
my tickets now.
give me my ticket now. And the fact that I didn't know about this and didn't know about this woman is insane. And then the addition of the fact that somebody recently said billionaires and rich people have become boring. They
Yeah.
have.
So
In
boring.
the past, they built libraries, they built museums, they built things where they could share and improve culture. And I think that we've lost that. And we need
Instead of
and
like
these types
throwing
of
their chips out on a table to get into space first, who gives a
yeah,
fuck? I
you
don't
know
give a shit.
what? Fine. Let's go to space, but have one
Yes.
person focus on that. And then the others go figure out, like, go have a big billionaire meeting and go, hey guys, how are we going to improve the world? How are we going to improve this?
End hunger.
And it and
Jesus.
hunger.
You do
Yeah,
that.
I mean, they're,
One of you end
yeah, you go
poverty.
to space, figure out how people can get clean water, figure out this climate thing. I mean, you guys, come on. We can do this. But all this to say is that in the past, I think people had purpose, right? They
Yep.
had a purpose. They went, I will devote my life to improving the arts or improving education or having access to art. And I think this is the example of Isabella Stewart Gardner. Like, even if somebody decided to permanently change her collection, she would go, the money goes to the education. Like, it goes to universities and be done with it. I do not, that does not go anywhere else. And the fact that they wanted to better society, I think is really important. And I think that's kind of, we've lost that a little bit. I think the lack of purpose.
Yeah.
But, to your point, going back to the segue of the robbery, I think that was such a great point that people in 1990 it started. People wanted to steal it away and hide it for their own personal collection. And I think that's something that we, are going to discuss a little bit more. But that's that what I wanted to add there about me and starting to, like, the first episode was really me going, wow, how have I not known about this before? And this is fascinating. And why isn't there a book about her? There's probably a book about her. There's
Yeah.
probably some movie about her. But that's, why don't we know enough about her?
Yeah. She's a very compelling person. So I try to go anytime I'm in Boston. I lived in Boston for a year, and I was working from home, and so as a way to, like, get out of my apartment at the time, I would go and I would sit in that veranda in the middle and just work from there because it's stunning. There's a lot of natural light that came into it, and I was just so fascinated with this place, and it was just it's a beautiful, like, serene setting where you could go do that. And then it's like that place I ended up, like, becoming a member for the year because I was like, "I'm just coming whenever I want, like, to come do
Yeah.
this. This is the best." And then this would have been 2023, so almost 2 years ago. Huh. Oof, that one just hit me in the stomach like a punch.
Barf.
It's 2025, holy shit.
And
So,
as a reminder, we're recording on like January 2nd.
yeah, happy New Year, everybody. Happy fucking
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Um, yeah, so we go to Boston. My husband was running the Boston Marathon. Our parents were coming. We had a whole crew with us. And I made everybody watch this documentary because I said, I've already gotten us tickets because we're going. So I made my whole fucking family watch this documentary.
It's a
And
public service, really.
all of them were like, what, what the fuck? We were all just, they had no idea. And then I will tell you, there are several things that give me goosebumps, like literally every single time I see it or hear it or have it happen. You're gonna get it when you go in those rooms and you see those empty frames. I want you to text me how sharp the goosebumps feel, because, like, I have goosebumps just talking about it, and every time I go into one of those rooms and I see one of those empty frames, I'm like, "Ah, there it is." Like, it's just 'cause it's chilling, literally chilling.
and the fact that they fucking cut them out.
Oh my god.
I barfed in my mouth a little bit. I was like, "What do you mean you cut out the sea of, like, Christ on the Sea of Galilee with a fucking knife? What do you mean?"
At least our boy Varan Tomic, like, unscrewed the
Yes, at least he had some respect.
God almighty. Yeah, it's horrific, and they keep those empty frames up as a reminder to be like,
Of course.
"Hey, fuckers, we still haven't found them. Everybody please help." Like,
Just give it
and so
back.
they
Just
never let it happen again.
leave it in the front on the front of the door. Just like but I mean, I don't know, unless somebody has them in like a good condition, like I don't know
Right,
what's
like,
like I don't even want to go down that path because I'm like, uh, in one of the later episodes they say something about how they were potentially like kept, and I'm like, "Oh, no, please God, no." Like, you
I
don't
know.
like, as an art lover, you're like, your brain doesn't wanna go there because 'cause you're like, maybe they're somewhere, maybe some weird person has them, and they're, like, well climate controlled and all of that. But yeah, I don't
Maybe
like
maybe we'll talk about that in later episodes because I think
yeah,
that's a relevant point, like, down the road. But I think that mentality, to bring it to the first couple episodes, the mentality of, like, as an art lover, you don't even wanna think about how they're being stored is part, and no victim blaming whatsoever, because who would think of this scenario ever? But to also be like, they say this in the first episode, I believe, or maybe even into the beginning of the second one when they kind of start talking about the security, right?
yeah,
They were doing climate control
exactly, yep.
renovations because they were like, we're an art museum. You can't there because it's not just art, there's tapestries. There's I mean, and listen, like you walk in some of those tapestry rooms and you gotta like take a deep breath because it's musty. Those things gather a lot of dust.
And then
Um,
the sewer thing where they talked about where like I was like, "Ugh." I was like,
right.
"No,
Like,
the
they
art."
were doing they were doing climate control and, insulation to make sure that, things weren't getting destroyed, and in your right mind, who the hell would be like, "We need the craziest security measures because someone's gonna come in here and steal these," right? Like, that I feel like that was part of the mentality too, where as art lovers, they literally just could not ever fathom someone coming in and doing this. And it was the same thing in Spider-Man of Paris, right? You just can't fathom that someone's going to mastermind this and then get away with it. And to have these paintings now, we're going in on 35 years later, still missing, and people still don't know who did it. It's wild, but yeah,
And
and
I
it's wild.
it's wild. And the fact is like, it's the difference between like people viewing like art in a lot of ways has become a public good. People think of it as a public good, but there's always been a monetization of it, right? It has
Oh
value.
yeah.
You know, but for example, pretentiousness alert, everybody. The first artist to ever actually make money off of his art while living, like big substantial amounts, was Monet. Which is
Mm,
not that long ago.
it's
So it was
not.
Manet and Monet were the 2 ones that actually made money. They weren't the starving artists, and then there's Picasso, and then, like, and then they started making, like, money of their living. But really,
Mm,
in the end, like, Monet and Manet were the first really big ones to make money, and, also they probably lived longer and their art, and you had art salons and all that in Europe. But really, in the end, money didn't become this like art didn't become this
yeah.
money generation value thing really until the Americans got into it, where they started kind of, buying it up in, after World War II. And they were like, hey, let's start, making, they started like taking all this art and they started putting it in museums, like, right. Isabella Gardner, we have the Phillips collection in Philadelphia. You
Mhm.
have these things where you became like art became international, right? And this is the reason I think a lot of that people forget that at some point, like it was in Europe for a little while, it got really famous. Like you had the like Monets, Manets, the Klimts of the world. And then the Americans are like, oh my God, there's art. There's things that we need to talk about. There's
Wait,
like
we
things that we
monetized something? You're
yeah.
kidding.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think it's more about like valuating
Totally,
it in that
totally.
sense. Um, and I think, there were museums obviously in Europe, and it's not like America, but you had the internationalization of art beyond Europe.
Yeah,
I think, once Americans really started creating collections in the US and started like doing this. Now, you'd have to probably like check me on this, and I'm gonna probably do a correction and I'll look it up. But if I remember correctly, that's really how it got really, really huge.
it makes
Um,
sense to me, but they even say it in the documentary how, like, the the value and the significance of having a fancy art piece really took off even in, like, the '70s and '80s because
yeah.
of auctions, because of Christie's, because of, all of these art auctions that where the value of art just skyrocketed, and then you think, well, if that really started happening in the '80s and this robbery was in the '90s, Veron Tomic was the early 2000s, like, makes
It
sense.
starts it's like where and we can't take these things out of context, right? Like in the
Right.
'80s we're coming out of the recession,
Mhm.
that big, like in the 80s, there was that big dip. And then in the 2000s, like you had the Great Recession. Like there's a lot of things that like drive economically these like big heists. And I
Mhm.
think we'll talk about it in a future episode, but one of the connections to who potentially took it also had an economic reason for kind of going into this part of like maybe heisting or stealing things. um, but I think that the interesting thing is like we can like roll into the second episode, which is the vipers in the grass. Again, these people are like, this is a public good. Nobody's gonna want to steal this. Like it's
Right.
not, and it's not even like, you know, you get like one or two. They stole 13 works of art. And this heist took 81 minutes. I mean, the amount of time that these people hung out. And I think those are the first two episodes really go really deep into what happened, how they did it, how long it took, and really the security faults and how
Mhm.
the guards and a lot of people, on the board kept going, you need to improve the security situation because they had in the 80s, early 80s, they had somebody try to steal something and they caught this person, and this is the first time we kind of get the mob connection in there.
Right.
Um, but I think, it's very interesting to see that security wasn't even thought of. It was an afterthought, and that was exploited.
Oh, yeah, they just had, like, that poor stoner kid working the shift the whole time, although I will say, what always sticks with me in these first 2 is they say that when they show even the outdated alarm system, right, that showed you step by step, minute by minute when someone enters a room, no one entered that blue room where the Tortoni was. So, the FBI guy who's like, "I'm pretty sure that was taken before the robbery," that one always sticks with me, but I think even from the first episodes, like, clearly there was someone on the inside has to have been involved, there's just no way. But I'm not saying it was Richard, poor little rich Rick, the millions of nicknames that they had for him.
Yeah,
Um,
I know.
I don't know, he was just like a stoner kid who wanted to play guitar, I just don't see that happening. But I looked it up. So, you mentioned that whoever did this spent 81 minutes in that museum. I looked up the average amount of time visitors spend in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum,
Is it 81 minutes?
60 to 90 minutes. They recommend you spend at least 2 hours in there, but think about that. The people who pay to go in to look at this entire collection, and it's 3 floors of wall to wall stuff. There's stuff you can't see everything in days. They tell you to spend 2 hours. From all of their records over the last several years, 60 to 90 minutes is how long people spend in there on average. 81 minutes they spent in that museum as the people who were stealing the artwork. Just think about that. People who are paying to go in as visitors to see the collection spend less time in there than the people who went in and stole this artwork. It's wild.
That's
81 minutes is on the high end of that average, the very high end of that average.
But also then why the fuck cut them out?
Don't know.
If you
You
were
don't know.
taking that
Bring a
long,
screwdriver.
like
Yeah.
they had one. Remember
They were breaking glass. Yeah.
one of the pieces they did screw out
Yep.
of. Like,
Yep.
I don't know. Like it was just there's a lot of things in this robbery that don't add up.
Yeah.
Like one thing that struck me was that one of the frames was left on the head of security's
Yes.
chair. I was like, that seems
Like a message.
a little that seems like like very like, hey, don't mess with us, right? And you know what I find interesting, that they didn't interview the head of security that was at the time, that they didn't
Mhm.
like him, but they did interview the guy before. So very interesting. Probably like didn't want to be interviewed or whatever. Um, but yeah, I just found that interesting that that guy wasn't on there. Um,
Yeah. And I really feel for, Anne Hawley, who was,
yes,
like, really the brand new director of the museum. And she's one of those who had the mentality right. She called all her board members being like, "Why didn't you tell me that something like this could happen?" And everyone's like, "Because why would we think that it's something that would happen?" But man, she how or why could she have been prepared? Like, she was unprepared, and I don't say that as a fault of hers. Like, again, nobody thought something like this would happen. So this poor woman's just berated, and she's not trained. She doesn't have media training for this type of stuff. So she kept being like, "Please just ask the cops." But then, as we heard, people from prison and people who were quote unquote connected or somehow saw it or had inside information, they didn't want to talk to the cops. They wanted to talk to her. She's like, "What the fuck am I supposed to do with this?" And I don't blame her, but she was there
And I
for 25 years, so, good for her.
Yeah, and I feel like the cops didn't really support her either, right? And it
Yeah.
feels like there was, yeah, in the security thing, they talk about how the cops and the FBI didn't really talk, which I think is like a tale as old as time, right? Like a lot of things probably fell through the cracks type of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I felt for her because you see her
Me
in
too.
that they show her in that press conference, like, right, like, as it happened, and you see like, you see she's trying to be strong. Like, you see, like, you're like, she's a professional. She's, like, not she didn't lose her cool. She was, like
Mhm.
but you see her, like, fraying, and you're like, "I don't" you see her going, "I don't know." Like, what do you like,
Yeah. I don't know how to
I'm
properly
I'm new
answer this.
here. I'm new
God.
here.
It's
I'm just trying to
she
preserve
wasn't
the art.
supposed to.
I'm new and I put in like a climate control system so these arts are okay. They're not
And
okay.
listen, they had a security system. It's not like they didn't have nothing. And
Yeah.
as they talk about it, someone had to open all the doors, right? There were 2 doors to get in the front door. Those had to be opened, and as we know, Richard did let them in because they were dressed as
Yep.
cops. They said, "We got a distress call," so right, they were let in through those 2 doors. Fine. But the back door that the alarm system said had been opened, clearly, someone had to open that
Yes.
because that did not close again. And so they had security. They did. But, like, clearly the people who wanted to get in there wanted to get in there and got in. You don't plan a robbery on the night of St. Patrick's Day in Boston by coincidence. That was
Nope.
no accident, right? Like, these
That was
people were
no
gonna get in.
accident.
They had a security system. It's not like they didn't have anything. But yeah, I mean, clearly someone on the inside
It was as
had to be involved.
but the thing is, and like this is what gets me, right? Like as with any good conspiracy theory, there's always one person that talks,
Always.
right? Always. And so far, if we talk about the first two episodes,
Yeah.
nobody talks. Nobody
Yeah.
said shit. Nobody said I've seen them. Nobody said I know I have like insider information around this. And it just seems like it was such a tight-knit situation that it's just like a closed circle, which leads us to the mob connection that they start talking about towards this
Yes.
end of the second episode. And this is, again, I not born in the US. And they started going into a little bit later about some history, and we'll go into that. But the fact that the mob was such a big deal in Boston, because you don't really think about the
Oh,
mob being a
yeah.
big, because you always like, me like thinking about it, I'm like, oh, it's New York City. Like they're huge in New York and like Boston. And they talk about how the person that almost had a plot to steal the paintings um was in the like was connected to the mob, and how potentially like
Providence
they had,
too.
yeah,
Providence,
Providence, and
Boston, huge, huge mob cities. Huge.
huge. And we haven't talked about Miles Connor,
I was just gonna bring him up too.
and holy shit, that guy is slimy. I was like, dude,
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel I feel like that guy knows something. Like he knows.
Yeah.
And it was just like the way he's sitting, the way, like the body language is like ask like it feels like you know what he's doing? He's like, ask me the right question. Like
Yeah.
ask me the right
Yes.
question. You know, it's kind of like taunting me. Like he's looking at me and he's looking at the director and he's kind of like in his eyes, like, just ask me the right question
Yeah.
and I will tell you everything. But you didn't really ask the right question, so I'm not telling you.
Still not answering it.
But something that I found that they kind of allude to was that art was now becoming a bargaining chip, right? He's the
Yes.
one
To
who
get
did
out of
it
jail.
first. He's the one who did it first. He had the
Yep.
Rembrandt, he hit it, and then he was in jail and he was like, "Let's go."
Which I wrote when I was rewatching these episodes, I wrote down um, Yarmouth, which is on the Cape, and Cape Cod is spectacular because that's where the other art heist happened, where like very similar, tied up the security guards with duct tape. I think it was like 13 pieces stolen, all kind of similar to what was taken from Isabella Stewart Gardner. Um, but like I the Cape is gorgeous. I grew up going there as a kid. My mom would run the Falmouth Road Race every year. So we spent time in Yarmouth. We spent time in all the places. The Beachcomber, fantastic cocktails there. They're kind of known for them, real crazy beach party scene, but it's fantastic. But really, I bring all this up because I want to just talk about the accents. Like, there's just everyone in here just has a great accent. There's some British people
I
in here. The cop from Yarmouth, like, just talk forever, please.
and then the cop the reporter at the oh, yes, and then the reporters. I love the fact that there were so many reporters in this
Yes.
documentary. Because it reminds us that the press is the fourth kind of checks and balances, and if the press wasn't involved, I think a lot of things wouldn't have happened, like, a lot of breaks wouldn't have happened, a lot of things wouldn't have happened, but the guy at the beginning that goes, "If I, this sounds pretentious to say," I was like, "Lay it on me, man. Do it." And he goes like, "The Louvre is like," I was like, and he's like, "The Musée d'Orsay." I was like, "Yes. Shower me with pretentiousness." I love it.
I also love the female reporter who's like, "Don't you know that everyone in Boston is related? Don't you know that? Boston,
Everybody knows.
everybody knows that." It's like,
Um,
yeah,
and then we'll talk about this, I think, later, but the fact is, like, people this was in 2021. Yes, we're in 2025, but people are
good.
really still, like, they remember this like it was yesterday,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And you get, like, the concept is, like, these reporters have probably written millions of stories, like, like, probably read their notes and stuff like that, but they're they're in it, like, they're in it
Mhm.
to they love this, and I think that's kinda goes back to the fact that the art is a public good. It hurts your soul a little bit that these works that were meant to be shared with anybody are now just gone,
But also,
and
again, compelling. How compelling it is. It is like I'm sure, not I'm sure. We know they have names and suspects of people they think they know were involved,
right.
but they've never been able to say they did it, he did it, she did it. They've never done that. And it's 35 years later. Like what
Yeah.
I oh god, if there's not a deathbed confession soon, like we may never know. We may
Oh
never
my
know.
god. Like, I don't like and I think the how how I'm trying to, like, word this appropriately because there's 13 works of art, but obviously we focus on Rembrandt's only seascape that he painted that we know of.
Only
There might be some
art.
things that we know of, I think is always
Correct.
a good but the concept of, like, the symbolism of that piece alone within the context of this heist, I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, Rembrandt is looking, like, you see like, represent pictures of the painting because thank God we have pictures of it, and, like, Rembrandt is looking at you going, "How do you think this ends?"
Yeah.
Which I feel is, like, the perfect kind of representation of this entire adventure and this entire thing. How do we think this ends? And the documentary does a great job of like setting all of it up, going, here's the stuff, here it is. And I think the first two episodes really set that up for us going into like the last two, where, kind of some more substantial theories kind of pop up and we talk about that. But I think looking at that piece in and again, the two major works that they talk about, because other ones are like less no like less valuable, but they're still valuable, is like the Shittortoni and then the Sea of Christ on the Sea of Galilee. And both of them are actually the the subjects are looking at you. The
Yeah, yeah.
major
They're looking right
subjects
at
are
you.
they're looking right at you, which I find, you know,
No,
telling, because they took these works and they're looking at these people, like these arts in the eye, really, and they still did it.
well, like the two of the other major paintings, though, The Lady and the Gentleman in Black,
Yes,
where
yes, yes.
they painted out the child that they had that passed away. Um, there's a woman looking at you in the Vermeer in the concert,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the self-portrait of Rembrandt. They're all looking
Yeah.
at you. That's such a good point. I didn't even think about that. I'm
And
just glad they didn't take my favorite piece that's in there is El Haleo. It's the flamenco dancer,
ooh, oh,
and
that's a
wait till you
good one.
it's massive, but wait till you see, like, the way it's set up in there. It just oh god, I'm so excited for you to go.
I, and I,
That one would be hard to take. That one's massive.
the concept of the Vermeer about the gentleman and lady in black. Isn't that interesting that, they lost a child and they bought that one and they didn't know there was a child that was
Yeah, it's
erased.
eerie.
Isn't that
It's
creepy?
eerie.
It's kind of creepy.
It is kinda creepy, and they may have known only because I know that at one point, she hired an art curator for her because she fell in love with him and had the
Ah,
money to. So I do know it. So
oh,
she may have, she may not. Either way, it's
yeah,
chilling
yeah.
and
The
eerie.
like the X-ray, because like I said, the X-ray of it. I don't know if they had that technology, but they had
Well,
X-ray
right.
back
So
then.
they,
But
but the story may have orally been passed down,
right,
right?
you're right. You're right. Fair, fair, fair. Yeah,
But still, it's creepy either way. Is it creepier if she knew or didn't know? I don't know. Maybe
yeah,
she felt like she related to the photo.
yeah.
So,
I mean, could
yeah,
be like
either
very
way,
well.
it's absolutely chilling. Yeah, there's a
But
couple comments I'm, like, biting my tongue over to
but
go into the
should
next
I
episodes, but
exactly, me too. So I think, maybe I what the fuck meter these two
yes,
episodes. I
yes.
mean, I'm sorry. This is like a 15. I don't know. Like I feel like
Burnett.
we need to change the scale, cuz every time give me a documentary, I'm like and like the first two, I'm just like screaming going like what? What's happening to me? And then the other one I had a couple of different quotes, but the
No, these are
first
out of
two
10.
going what
Like, there's no limit. This is gonna be an out of 10, but there's no limit to where your meter can go. I
15.
think that's
15
fun.
for 15 for the first two
Still,
episodes.
it is
15 for
recording.
the first two episodes, because I have another one for
I
the
love that.
second two.
I love it.
So yeah, these are the kind of our discussion of the first two, and we're trying to like keep it together to not do this second two. So I think it's time we're like naturally going into the second one. But as always, thank you for joining us. Again, we're gonna just roll into for the next episode. It's gonna be the last two episodes of This Is a Robbery. So it's gonna be another doc is in, and the last two are We've Seen It and $10 million reward. So again, as always, thank you for joining us. Email us, share, like, we're on Instagram, you know, do all the things that the kids do to share this. And we will, thanks always, Elaine, our intrepid documentary, like, you know, leader, because she just constantly brings us the good stuff. And this, I think we didn't talk about. I forgot to talk about the rating meter, the rotten
Yes,
rotten
Rotten Tomatoes.
tomatoes meter, it's 83%, which I'm like, what is wrong with humans? Like,
Mhm.
this needs to be at least 90, like,
Agreed.
for sure. 90
Agreed.
for like, and that's even like being nice. That should be higher. But yeah, 90. So here we are. We're gonna do the last two. And thank you all for joining us. And don't forget to listen to the second one.